Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of the Testing Peers. Tonight we're going to talk about testing from the start, or including testers as early as possible. As always, I'm joined by the other three amazing peers, David.
Hello.
Chris.
Howdy.
And Russell.
Hello.
And I'm Simon. As always, we are delighted to be sponsored by Saffron QA. Saffron QA are specialists in testing recruitment and provide a range of bespoke recruitment services to organisations across the UK. For further details about Saffron QA, please see the show notes or visit saffronqa.co.uk. Russell, what bants have you got for us tonight?
Well, based on the topic, we're talking about obviously getting involved early. So that logically made me think about the end, getting involved at the end. Just because, that's the way my brain works, opposites. Someone says it works, I think it doesn't. Just how I work. I was born awkward. So I was thinking about things that we've finished, things that we've completed, done. Can you tell me, I guess, a little bit about your proudest completion, thing that you've finished?
The first thing was when I completed my first marathon. I did it within the time. I did it within 4 hours. However, the last 5 miles were incredibly tough mentally rather than actually physically. The euphoria of actually having completed it was an amazing feeling. I would never want to take that away. And obviously, it's the same as anything. The first time you complete something, is such an amazing feeling. I've done other marathons, and you do get that feeling, but you almost prepare yourselves to know that you can do it the second time because you've already done it the first time. That first time was finishing that definitely worth it. My most memorable finish.
Yeah, and I've got it. It's similar, but different enough. When I was in the cadets, I did a 4-day march through Holland around Nijmegen, and it was 25 miles a day for 4 days. I had to qualify to be able to march with my Bedfordshire and Cambridgeshire team, and completing the 100 miles in full military outfit and marching in step with the rest of the team was quite an achievement. So much so that I did it 2 years running. I completed it the first year and then went back and did it again the next year. And this was as I was 15 and 16. So it was quite a big accomplishment at that age, and it's something that still sticks in my head now as being something I'm really proud to have completed. It was tough, especially when you're wearing military footwear and not trainers, and you're having to march, and you only stop 3 or 4 times a day to refill up on water and eat and stuff. But it's one of those things I imagine, David, it's like the marathons where you have the crowd along the roads and they're almost pushing you along. And as you're marching, because you're obviously not running, you're slower. You've got kids coming up on you and giving you chocolate bars and giving you stuff in the streets. And just the Dutch people were just amazing at making you feel like you were a celebrity sort of marching through. And yeah, that still sticks in my mind as one of my greatest achievements, I think, completing that.
I think you're right that actually it's sometimes the environment, exactly as you say, the crowd can certainly help you, and actually engaging with the spectators is vitally important. So the second year I did the marathon, I made sure that I put my name on my number, so therefore they were able to call out my name, whereas that hadn't happened, which is why I think I struggled in the last few miles. But having that engagement, even though they're all complete strangers, exactly as you say, and people hearing that really fires the emotions and allows you to continue.
Well, mine's not going to sound as exciting now. Look at you guys completing these big old jobs. I think probably like a good sense of achievement for completing something I would have is throughout school, I'd always sort of liked the idea of being in one of the shows, like be it a play or a musical or something, but quite frankly was terrified of rejection, let alone everything else that comes after you've even done an audition. And so it was only until the last year that I had the opportunity to actually do this that I actually went for it. And it's because I was doing a drama GCSE, and they said that we kind of had to. And I did it, and I got a role in a play, Lord of the Flies, very morbid and dark. But I was able to actually get over things like stage fright and remembering lines and staying composed in a very public forum like this. We did it in the round, so you're not just on a stage looking down on people, you're literally surrounded by everybody watching the thing, which is 1,000 times more intimidating. I'd gone from the point of within a year standing up to read in front of class where I was physically shaking to the point where my desk was moving away from me. I was shaking so much. If you can sort of picture how terrified I might have looked at that point. He made everyone applaud when I finished because he realized that I was mortified and sort of drained. So to actually have got to the point where I could be in a play, perform adequately in front of a bunch of people and be a part of something that was ultimately a successful run. I don't care if it made money for the school or anything like that, but I mean, people attended, people applauded. I forgot my lines once, but everyone carried on and it was fine. That was a really big deal for me because I'd liked the idea of those things. I'd liked the idea of being part of those things because theatre is exciting and it's wonderful. And I think there's so much good that can come out of it, but there's so much fear of rejection and being very public and having everyone with their eyes on you and doing all those things. Plus, just remembering stuff under pressure and performing and portraying something. It was truly terrifying and it was really hot with all the lights and stuff as well. It happened at the same time my voice broke. So my voice was all over the place. So getting through every single performance was a major achievement and probably something from school that I'm most proud of. I even got an A in my GCSE drama. Hooray me.
Sounds good. I'm impressed you did drama with that sort of background there. So a brave choice. So for me, I have a lot of things I tried to complete but never did. But I guess the proudest one for me that I actually did complete, odd as it is I ripped out the decking from the back of my house and I replaced it with a retaining wall and then paved over it. And I did some very nice paving. I rendered some walls. I did all that sort of DIY by myself because that's the sort of job that I've completed that I'm probably most proud of. Could say some running, but I haven't really done that. I still keep meaning to do a 5K park run, but I keep putting it off. And that's going to be put off for a bit longer now. But yeah, so to me, it was kind of getting the decking done, the garden done, making that look pretty. Because I hate decking with a passion. So anyway, we should probably talk topic now, shouldn't we?
We probably should, shouldn't we? Testing at the start. I mean, I think this come about because I think we've all had some experience, and the default experience of testing, if you speak to someone outside of our industry, would be that testing happens at the end. And yes, that's very contextual, and yes, it's looking at it from a waterfall perspective. That's the standard way of looking at things. And I guess really the whole point of this discussion was how can we change that, and what are the benefits of testing being involved at the start?
It's not just the act or the art of testing.
No, of course not. It's just
it's testing and quality activities.
Yes, absolutely.
And testing being considered and testability and things.
Well, I guess that comes down to what your class is testing.
Exactly. That's why I kind of thought, well, now that we've had Russell start at the end, maybe we could start at the start. And
probably the next bit's the middle. In reverse.
No. I was always told that the beginning was a very good place to start. What ultimately that is, what do we mean by testing or testing activities or quality at the beginning and involving those things? What does that mean to you? What does that even look like? Because if we don't know what we talk about, we're like, how can we say that provides value if we can't talk about what it is?
For me, it's shaping the idea at the start from a quality perspective. So it's not allowing the business to go away and design something as being the end solution without any input from a quality perspective, without any input of looking at it from how are we going to test this? How are we going to verify that this is a quality solution, that the customers are going to like it? A lot of that can come through discussions, but that for me would be the starting point.
I think it's a context thing as well in terms of what the expectation is of the people on the project. Because, the old style thing is that testing is just writing the test scripts and performing it and making sure that there are green ticks all the way through to show that the product is of high quality. However, there are far more nuances to testing and test, in my mind, that testing should be thought of initially, as much because of the requirements, thinking about what can be actually tested from the initial discussions. and from the design, and that has to be discussed early. You know, some of our processes, we even at the start, we think about the production site or where you're actually actually going to put the product, because some of the products we work on are massive. If you're trying to have to get it through a standard doorway, you obviously have to plan that from the start. And test is very similar. You need to make sure that you understand the complexity of it, so therefore you can plan for the framework, the structure that you're actually, the test rig that you might need to test early on, so that therefore isn't a delay while you're waiting for particular parts, waiting for people to write in a particular language or have the skill set or ramp up in order to understand it. And that has to be thought of early, because sometimes test projects can be almost more complex and should be treated as a separate project of equal complexity than the actual one that you're actually producing.
Yeah, I think I like the idea of the conversations at the beginning. Like it's framing that expectation. It's understanding the context. It's understanding what the end goal is.
Yeah.
So it's understanding the customers. It's understanding the risks and how we define value and quality. It's ensuring that those things are done upfront, because as we talk about the title of the feedback loops, the sooner you know these things, the less time, the less cost it will cause you. And maybe it takes longer before you write a line of code or do something, but the short-term pain has incredibly high value and long-term gain, doesn't it?
Well, I mean, yeah, exactly. I was able to prove in a previous role that by having us engaged earlier, doing testability assessments of requirements, was able to shave 2 weeks off our testing time, because we had that knowledge up front that we didn't have to spend time scrambling to learn it later on. And we were able to write stuff in parallel to development doing their bits, so that we were able to then hit the ground running from the point the code was ready to go. Once you start doing it that way, it's a no-brainer, but it seems to be a very difficult thing to get over the line in the first place. It's that art of persuasion of trying to show that there is a way to do things better by including us earlier, and not seeing test as a cost, or as an overhead, as a cost perspective, an expense.
Just trying to think a bit about kind of agile, and I guess thinking a little bit towards Scrum in itself, part of it, which obviously when you start things, often you start with this concept of sprint zero, or sprint zeros. Sometimes it's more than one, because you need to kind of get the basic frameworks in place, the kind of the setup, the Git repositories, the infrastructure there, so that you can actually start building things and all that sort of stuff up there and running. Never mind the requirements. You need to actually get just a place that you can put your code, pipeline that you could run some things in. And from that context, it's kind of sounds wrong, a no-brainer in my head, in order to get the testers to do that in parallel with anyone else is doing work, because you've got the test repositories, you've got, as Chris, I think, and David both mentioned, about what good looks like. What's the end goal? What's your definition of done to a degree? What do you need to achieve? What's the code standard? And it may be different to start with, but if you're doing sort of modern software delivery where you're doing infrastructure as code as well, then that needs to be tested as part of your initial creation and so on. And that's the first opportunity for your testers to get involved, to making sure that infrastructure ramps up, tears down, so that halfway through your project, you're not always suffering with environmental issues. You've got to get the practices started and going, because whatever you start, you will learn. So as much as we say about trying to get the right thing at the very start, you won't. But as soon as you start learning, the better. You'll learn faster. And if you're learning in parallel to your DevOps, to your ops, to your developer teams, to your BAs, you're actually learning a lot of the fundamentals that will help you be more successful. Simon's point. You'll understand the reason for decisions. So actually later you don't question some bugs, because you have the context of why accessibility wasn't the priority, because you were there, you were in the discussions, and you don't relive them and do them 12 times. I've done that on many projects with testers coming at the end, where you just relive every decision that's been made, because they're not documented, they're not known, so you end up just having to repeat them, which is a waste of everyone's time, to be quite honest. And that's more costly, because it's the tester's time, the developer's time, the project manager's time, the scrum master's time, everyone's time. So it's multiplied.
Oh, well, I'd like to pick up on two particular points there. I think the important thing of building the sort of test framework or the test infrastructure at the same time is because as with anything, you can make sure that it's integrated at the same level as the development side. And also, there may be idiosyncrasies that during the creation of those things that actually, if you do it a couple of months down the line, may be forgotten. And so therefore it adds, like you said, it adds time to the build-up because those sort of things have happened. And that leads into the other point of, if testers are brought in later and have questions about accessibility, again, it needs to be relived, that conversation, but also the reasons why they may have considered that not part of the development have to be gone through, emails or whatever trace. And sometimes it might well have just been a discussion and there may not be documentation. And so therefore it then sort of dredges up all that conversation as to why it wasn't done, and people might not necessarily have remembered it. Whereas actually, if people were involved from the start, then it's a collective understanding of why it wasn't done rather than just one person's memory against another.
Yeah, it helps you feel more accountable as a team. If you're making decisions as a team, if you're left out of it, you're always going to create a kind of divide, which slows you down. It slows down your productivity in general.
And also it adds the sort of them and us scenario, which we've all spent a lot of time trying to break down, but there are still going to be people out there that do think of it as them as us. That sort of scenario reinforces that.
I think the other thing that it really helps with, and it's something we have touched on before in previous episodes, is it just builds that communication, it builds that relationship from the very start, rather than it being quite, like you say, them and us. If you've built that camaraderie and that collaboration from the very start, whether you cover everything off and work everything out at the very beginning, it then enables those conversations to be more easy throughout the project. If you have thought of something later on, if accessibility testing is something halfway through, we haven't thought about accessibility. Okay, we've already got that relationship now, so we can then you can then build that quite quickly and work out what the right solution is across the team, not just test in isolation. Whereas if you're coming to things late, the test team starts the first day when they're halfway through the project, the code's been written, all the requirements have been signed off, then they get involved. And I know I'm talking in a very sort of waterfall-y type context, but I think you can apply similar things to an agile or a DevOps world as well, that where if the collaboration isn't in place, then you start with a long list of things that you need to sort, and then you're bombarding the team with all this stuff that you need to resolve before you can get going. That just hinders you straight away. It slows you down. You're not able to start when you're actually assigned to start the work. Whereas if you are involved from the very beginning, you can just drip feed that stuff in the period of time to get things moving. The communications will start working quicker. You'll just find that by the time you are in a place where requirements or stories are being defined, you've already got an idea of how you're going to test it, so you can start working in parallel, and the whole thing rolls so much more smoothly.
There's a caveat to this, though, isn't there? Because
the context thing again, isn't it?
What it can sound like, though, is that we can't do anything until everybody's on board, or so many people have been involved in something. And actually, you can't start something with a huge group of people, not straight away.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, agreed.
And you also can't wait to start something until all ducks are in a row. And it's important to sort of discuss that, because I think we've talked about how satisfied are you with something before it is released. And if, and sometimes those of us that work in software, we look at the quality of the thing that we're working on, and we're never truly satisfied with it, and so we never really want it to be released. And the same could be true with, I'm never really happy with this point. So they're almost like this minimum viable starting point, because we have to start, and we can't, everything isn't possible to be right at the beginning. So we talk a lot about iterating and improving and stuff, and I think the best approach when it comes to involving quality activities early is to not be afraid of failing or getting things wrong, but to embrace it, because it's significantly healthier culturally to embrace failure than it is to live in regret or saying, I wish we'd done it like that. I wish I'd spoken up about those things. At least if you're upfront and you engage ideas and these sort of desires and things up front, and even if you've tried them, you've been given the freedom to do them early on, that's better than to say, oh, we should have done this.
One thing I'd say there is just, this is my pet peeve of mine, nothing else, but don't embrace failure, embrace learning. Failure is a word that's got a lot of cultural connotations to a lot of us that's hard to break. And it's a hard thing to get that culture, whereas the culture of learning is something much easier to get your head around and do. Now, it can fail, but it doesn't have to be catastrophic.
Sometimes the only thing you can learn by failing is that it doesn't work.
Yeah, and just the concept of failure is the word that we use. It's like everything, semantics and language. It means multiple things, not just one thing. But failure is often catastrophic. People are trained in life to avoid failure. That's what we're taught.
But that's true also of many different things. I think in software, and semantics is a thing I think we can dive deeply into on a lot of things.
To me, it's about embracing the learning rather than the failure itself.
Yeah, I like it, but I think that doesn't necessarily provide enough granular context to what you're doing, because we can learn stuff without stuff going wrong, and sometimes it's the fear of failure that leads us to regret and not even trying those things. And sometimes the activity, the thing that is a negative part of failing, we need to sort of embrace how that makes you feel and see how that is an opportunity to learn to do things differently. And there probably is a better way of phrasing that. You're right.
I'm just saying that conceptually, people find it very hard to get their heads around that. It's much easier to get your heads around, learn from things. Mistakes, failures are the words we commonly call these things, but it's all about the culture of learning rather than failing. The outcome is what we want. We've got to try, though. That's, I think, your ultimate point, Chris. You've got to try, because waiting to avoid failure, that's silly. And you've got to kind of put things into production. You've got to get things out there. You've got to get feedback. I think we all kind of prescribe to this concept that the best way of knowing whether something works or not is from the customer's perspective. We can speculate to our heart's content whether this product works, but only the customer can really tell us if it's meeting their needs. And that's, I think, one of the modern testing principles somewhere, I think. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you've got to get it out there, and you've got to do it. We did it with the podcast. We released it quite quickly, the first one we did. We weren't all that comfortable with doing it, but we did it so that we got some sort of learning so that we could improve it. But going back to the first kind of point about sort of getting involved early, because there is different involved. There's in the conceptual idea of what the project is going to be. That's really early. Talking about the idea, building in testability into how do we prove this idea works. Getting really, really early into the concepts of the kind of the project, making sure the footing of it is right. Never mind the technologies, never mind requirements, but at the very high level, what is this project trying to achieve? And I think we started talking about testing, testers. So it was quite good to kind of say what those mean to us, because we're talking from a quality mindset. We want someone involved to help make sure, reassure, build the right product. That's kind of the important thing. I think we've got to try and help the product people, the development teams, whoever they happen to be, to help build the right product. And we can do that by being in those discussions. It doesn't mean we have to be writing test cases. It doesn't mean we have to be building infrastructure even. We can do it from the high-level discussions. And it goes back to that sort of three amigos concepts. Having different people from different mindsets together, you're more likely to get a resounding plan. Having everyone, as Chris said, if you build a team of 50 to make a decision, you're not really going to decide anything ever. But just trying to get different perspectives, and testers, good at that.
I was going to jump in and say about the three amigos and why that's such a successful, in my experience, it's such a successful process, because you get three representatives from the core elements of a delivery team to come together and work out a solution, and they all work out what the right way to test is. They all work out the right way to develop the solution, and they work out how to challenge the actual purpose of the system. So it's just that concept, and for me, that's almost the epitome of getting involved early. Is in the agile sense that is the key way to start that feedback loop early and to get that collaboration going.
One thing I was going to say as part of that of getting in early is that also as testers, we need to be seen to add value. There's no point in being a passive person in those discussions, because otherwise, again, we're seen as an extra resource and not actually being helpful at that particular time. The other thing I was going to say was pick up on one of Simon's things is if tests are involved later, then potentially we can be seen as troublemakers. We're coming in later, we're causing problems, they're asking odd questions, they're taking the development people away from their actual development activities because they're asking these questions because they're not up to speed yet. We were a highly agile, fast-paced group, and now they're coming in and they're stalling us, and actually that does have very negative connotations. And so again, if we can break that down in order to add value early, then you get that rapport, you get that benefit, or they get the benefit early on, and then we can build on that reputation.
You're right, and there is that view. I mean, especially from I've experienced it myself with PMs or with the business when they've gone, well, I'm not paying the X hundred per day for a tester at the start of a project. It's just not in our budget. We don't have that kind of money because we don't see any value in it. And then you start talking about it, and they want to see a tangible value. And what tangible value at that point, in the traditional sense, can you see a tester actually providing? Yes, if they're not engaged early, as we're saying, that they should be engaged. That the most they're going to provide is a test plan or a test strategy, etc., etc. And the business are not going to see the value in that. It's that collaboration piece, it's that conversation piece, it's helping refine the requirements. Until you can start making that tangible to the business, sometimes they're not going to see that value. And that's where I've found the hardest battle is to move us left, is actually, if there's a cost associated with being involved, then the value part of it is crucial to try and articulate in the right way.
I guess I was going to say one of the ways to mitigate the cost is you don't need a full team sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely.
As we talked about.
Yeah.
If the whole team's responsible, there's a concept we talked about before about building the infrastructure up. Well, actually, that could be dev, it could be test. It doesn't have to be any job title. So you could balance some of the needs of these things. And who's to say that the actual work for test architecture or test infrastructure isn't greater than the development infrastructure? Normally, you've got multiple test environments. You've got multiple different things to do. Performance, load, security, often production. There's lots of different things that actually can involve more than sometimes the development world. So I think it's something that maybe we can scale down testing. I think we need some testers involved, but it doesn't always mean you need your full team. And if you've got that whole team attitude, which you do when you get a tester in there, then at least it keeps it rolling much more successfully than if you had zero testers in there.
I was thinking back to Dan Ashby's continuous testing model. A lot of what we talk about with testing is finding out information. There's a lot of information we can find out before code has ever been written. There's information about the customers, about the requirements, about artifacts, like we've already talked about, things that we're going to need in the future. And the more we find out, the more we know that we're going to need to test or where we're going to need to test. We've been given that information. And we do it. That's a part of exploration and testing, critical thinking and curiosity, and all of these things that are implicit in testing. But there's also risk and mitigation of risks, because where we value quality and where we value risk, those things go together quite like a plus and a minus on a magnet or something. Doing that investigation and finding out what risk is, that like the risk storming stuff, where you can say, this is what we value, these are the things that could go wrong, this is how we mitigate it. All of these are activities you can do without writing a test plan, without writing test strategies, without executing tests or using automation frameworks. This is stuff that is with people, because ultimately software lives and dies because of people's successes or failures, be them decisions or implementations. It is a people first thing, and the people that perceive the quality at the end of that thing will also lend itself to those. So bringing people together is a key aspect of testers, and the sooner that we can do that in the correct format with the correct people at the correct time. And I'm not saying that is just testers. It's a quality activity that needs to be done. And part of what we've discussed previously as an attribute that a tester has is an awareness of the people around them, having an understanding and an empathy for both the customers and their colleagues, and being able to sort of ascertain the right way we should be trying to do things, and articulating and communicating and collaborating with our team to get the best results. I think it's kind of important to establish that testing is so much more than physically doing a test execution or writing or documenting or reporting. It is an activity that transcends one role And it isn't necessarily one person's responsibility. In fact, I think we would all argue that quality belongs to the whole team. Therefore, quality activities should be natural to them. And so often where we see a tester's role fitting within that can be along the lines of coaching testing. So that could be just the one facilitating or asking those little questions, prodding and probing within their team or stakeholders to find the answers to those investigative questions so that we can be better informed, so that when the art of test execution and exploration and automation actually physically can begin at whatever point that is correct, we have as much information as we can get to ensure that the job that we do is as effective and provides as much of that value up front. Because I think half the argument we have is around showing the value of a test doing that. And if the understanding of testing activities is only that last piece, it's always going to fail. So maybe we need to find a better way of describing that or showing that. And I'm sure there's some good metaphors along the lines that you could probably go to, like a recipe that the final activity is putting it in the oven, but you've done all that work beforehand. And it doesn't work if you just take all the ingredients and shove it in the oven without having done the right things together. I think we'd all agree that food doesn't work if you don't put it together to make the stuff that tastes nice.
And in the correct order.
And in the correct order and the correct amount.
That's where I've gone wrong. That's why my cooking's terrible.
Going back to Russell's point about having people involved early, and I think Simon mentioned it as well, is that especially with the amount of time, you don't need the whole team. You don't actually need to necessarily have a tester on 100% of the time. If it's at that initial design stage, you only really need to be in the key meetings. You don't necessarily have to do all the work in between. But as long as you've got that progression through and are involved in all the discussions, then, as Chris said in that final point, is that when you do ramp up the team, you then are able to pass that information, that history, without having to pick through the rest of the group or the devs or whoever is working on the project in order to distill all the information that was discussed in the previous however amount of time. That information is captured within the test area, and so therefore that information can be passed on, and so therefore you can ramp people up quickly because there's a context involved as part of it.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I mean, again, I'm looking at things, trying to not look things at just from a waterfall-y project perspective, but almost from a story for an agile sprint. And you're right, it's exactly the same thing. You don't need the whole team to be involved in that story scoping, but you need somebody from a test perspective to be involved with it. You need to get that feedback, that loop moving quickly, to enable you to scope it in the right way, to enable you to build it in the right way, to know what you need to test, to define the architecture, etc., etc. And you're right, yeah, it's just having that person. It doesn't, like you say, it doesn't need to be the whole team, but just getting people involved early will help move that forward more quickly.
Can I ask a question of the group? How many of you people have been involved in projects where the coding has started, so the solution's been built before testers have been put onto the project by, let's say, 2-week period or more?
Way more than 2 weeks.
Yeah. Yes, definitely.
All done it.
Have you?
I've picked up the pieces. I've never been kind of brought in, I guess. In the consultancy world, I've had to deal with, oh yeah, there wasn't any testers, so we did the development work. Now fix this. Thank you. I've done that.
I've had the scenario where it's been, developers in-house have gone away and they've developed it, and then they've gone, we started this project, you might have heard of it, but we're now ready for tests. So here's the requirements, here's the code, let us know when you're finished, or it needs to go out in 3 weeks, kind of thing. I've also been there where it's a third-party solution that's been brought in from a development perspective. So it's developed by this third party. They've done all their work, they're handing it over to us, but we don't hear about it until they're handing it over. And at that point, you're then scrambling to try and get ideas from them, you're getting requirements from them, you're getting designs from them, and their designs and stuff are all very sketchy. So it ends up in a big pile of not in a good place.
I'm going to say, from our experiences, what's caused testers not to be involved there? Is there any advice, I guess, ideas that we can give? Because often when testing isn't involved early, as we mentioned, that's where it causes problems. So we've talked about pairing testers very early into the sort of the joint work. I think we haven't really talked about when the coding has started and you still don't have testers. I'm guessing because we all think that's kind of a no-brainer, but maybe I'm wrong.
Well, and that's something that when it first happened to me, I was like, but surely everyone knows that you need to get testers involved earlier than that. And it was like a blank face from the business at the point where, well, no, we've never got testers involved at that point. And sometimes it's an education thing. Sometimes it's just the way it's always been, and they've never moved forward. But yeah, and other times I think it's just there is that fear that, as David mentioned earlier, that testing will be a bottleneck. That actually, let's just get on and do it. We'll get them involved later. We don't need to have them in the discussions now. They're just going to ask lots of awkward questions, and it's going to slow us down. And I've experienced that as well, where oh no, we don't need you involved yet. You're just going to slow us down. We need to get the code written first, then you can get.
I've had that discussion over Three Amigos or similar sorts of discussion where we said let's bring in the right people before we write the code and do that. That's on an in-flight like project, but we've agreed as a team we should be doing this. We should get at least a tester, developer, and stakeholder involved so that we can ensure that we're all on the same page before the code's written. And developers have said, but that's going to slow me down writing code. In that instance, the only way to prove the value in doing it was to essentially say we were going to try this as a team for the next sprint, and then to prove the value of those things by doing it, modeling this is how we want to do it, and that's the only way it works. Now that's like a small level. That isn't the whole project level, but those things have an impact. You see this idea of getting people on the same page before you start works. People see that works. More people see that works. It's a bit of a snowball effect. Sometimes you just need that small win. You just need to convince a couple of people to give it a go and run with it, and that's not always possible, but it's worth fighting for. I think we can agree.
Absolutely, and I think that's probably enough time today, and it's been a really useful discussion about getting tests in early and thinking of it. And going back to the start in Russell's discussion, unfortunately, we now have to end this productive discussion for today. So thank you very much for listening. Thanks again for Saffron QA for sponsoring us, continued sponsorship. Also, please, if you have any feedback or want to rate us, then please do go to your listening point and rate us. And also, you can also reach out to us on LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook using Testing Peers, or contact us through email at contactus@testingpeers.com. And also, if you want to help support us, then please go to the Patreon site. Finishing off that discussion, thank you very much for listening, and we'll catch up with you next time.
For now, it's goodbye from the Testing Peers.
Goodbye.